82,000 former hospital patients are going to be getting some good news in the next month or so. I'm Scott Ott with Bill Whittle and Stephen Green, and this episode of Right Angles brought to you by the members at BillWhittle.com. Gentlemen, 82,000 patients who owe a total of some $278 million in debt from medical care that they received at a chain of hospitals are going to receive notice from an organization called RIP Medical Debt that their debt has been wiped clean. Some of these patients have been in debt for as many as 10 years. Most of these patients would have qualified for the hospital's, I'm going to call it, indigent care program, a program that allows them to either have their debts waived or to reduce them or to spread them out over time in some way to make it easier for them to share the burden. Stephen Green, I thought that this story was interesting in a number of ways because RIP Medical Debt is going to actually give the money to the hospital to pay off the debts of these patients, many of whom many of which have already been written off as far as the IRS goes. There was some $49.6 million in outstanding debt from patients that this one chain of hospitals, I'm not mentioning the chain of the hospitals only because I think that this story is bigger than them, and I don't think it's important to dwell on them, but about $49.6 million of outstanding debt from patients who likely qualify for financial aid but got bills instead, and this chain wrote off $37.7 million of that. Now, the chain says that it makes efforts through its staff and counselors and information it provides to make sure that people understand that they can apply for these programs, and if they provide information, they can get their debt erased. However, a lot of people either don't begin the process or don't complete the process. Some experts have said it's because the process is so difficult even to find out about, and others say that it's because it's kind of cumbersome and difficult to work through, and so people bail on this. Steve, in general, do you think it's a good idea for a charity like RIP Medical Debt to give the money to the hospital, or would it be better to give it to the individuals who owe the debt to the hospitals so that they can use that to pay off the debt?
Well, I'm kind of of two minds on that one. Number one, as we've learned in a multi-trillion-dollar war on poverty, that you can't cure poverty by giving people money. Poverty is a set of behaviors that leads to no money. It's not the no money part. That's the result. It's not the cause. So I'd be hesitant to give the money directly to folks, because who knows if they're actually going to pay their bills. I'm also hesitant to give the money to a hospital chain that's this poorly run when it comes to their own program. I would give the money to the hospital on one condition, or the hospital chain, I should say, and that condition would be you've got to start advertising this program, and you've got to streamline the approval process, the application process, because clearly when you're talking this much money, people are not taking advantage of the very benefit that you're supposedly offering them. Okay, imagine if I set up a program for my kids, they're ages 10 and 15. It was Dad's free ice cream. All the free ice cream you want, any flavor, and I'll even go get it myself. There's just one thing. I never mention the free ice cream program, never once. What I do is I have their least favorite teacher at school mention it once or twice in passing throughout the school year. And that there are a bunch of conditions also that my kids will have to fulfill in order to get all this free ice cream. They're going to have to poop or scoop the yard. They're going to have to keep their rooms clean. They're going to have to take the trash cans down the driveway every Tuesday. There's this long list of conditions. In fact, it goes worse than that. They're going to have to change the oil filter in my car. They don't know how to do that. Just all sorts of strange chores that they've never had to do before and may not even know exist. And then 10 years down the line, I'm going to ask them, hey, kids, remember all that free ice cream? And they're going to ask, what? And then I'll explain to them all they had to do to get the free ice cream was to do all of these chores and jump through all of these hoops and to pay attention to that one teacher who might have said something once. That's what they've done here. They've made it impossible for the people who need this program that the hospital chain themselves set up to take advantage of it. It's like having a charity that raises money and never gives it out. What the hell are they doing?
Bill Whittle, the people from this hospital chain would argue that they didn't do, they haven't been treating people the way Steve said. And they say that they have financial counselors who help patients to collect the information they need to apply for the program, which includes tax and bank records, 2 years of tax returns, recent pay stubs, disclosure of monthly household expenses and assets. And this has always been one of the challenges with programs to help people who are struggling financially. You almost by definition, you don't want to be wasteful with the money that either comes from taxpayers or from donors to your charity. On the other hand, when people need help, their pride often stands in the way. And then when you say to them, oh, by the way, all we need, we love you, we want to take care of this for you, we don't want to embarrass you, but can you give me 2 years of tax returns, some recent pay stubs? Can you give me a full accounting of your household expenses and income? Bill, is there any way that this could be done well?
As it turns out, I have personal experience with this kind of thing. I was living hand to mouth for 25 years of my life, I guess. I ruptured a disc in California, ruptured one disc and herniated the one next to it. And it was so bad I went to the movie theater with my mom shortly after, and I couldn't turn my head to her. I had to get up and rotate at the hip. So I was really hurting bad. And I drove to Florida to work on a show down there. And it got worse and worse. And I went to the doctor and they said, you're going to have this. There's no question about it. This disc has to be removed. And that's that. And it's going to cost, I don't know, $12,000, whatever the number was. I didn't have $1,200, not even close to that. And so what they said was, the hospital said, why don't you go try Voc Rehab, which is a Florida State vocational rehab, is basically a government program. So that's what I did. And I went in there and I was acutely ashamed and I was very lucky because I was the first case that an incoming person had. There was still a supervisor there, but I was the very, very first person that this new hire got to deal with. And they approved me. And I remember just being overwhelmed with gratitude when they approved me. And when I thanked them for it, she said, you're the only person that's come in here who's treated this as if it wasn't entitled to you. You're the only person who's come in here asking rather than demanding. And I thought, well, that's interesting. And they said something to me that I think really bears on this issue when we come to things like charity and people who can't pay their bills and so on. When I talked to him about it, I said, thank you. I don't know, what I'll be able to do to pay you back, basically. And this woman said to me, listen, here are the options for the state of Florida. We either pay for this operation and we put $12,000 into this and you are able to get back to work and then you're paying taxes for the rest of your life, or we don't pay for the operation and you go on disability for the rest of your life. You don't contribute anything. It's going to cost us 100 times what the operation would cost. And so it's a smart play for us, not just the right thing to do. It's a smart thing to do. And I remember being very struck by that. It eased a lot of my guilt over it. So I guess all of this just to simply say this. The idea of a charity paying off people's medical bills is a beautiful, beautiful thing. And I hate to see this thing get caught up in this to the point where no good deed goes unpunished. I don't care if it's one individual or corporations or a group of smaller people. When people voluntarily give their money to help out others in need without it having taken from their wallet at gunpoint, that is a beautiful thing to see. And this program should be applauded for that. But as Scott was angling around, when you make it more difficult to apply for the aid than it is to live with the condition, you're going to find that the people are going to basically just say, I'm sorry, I can't do anything. And this is the problem. You pointed it out, Steve. It's a set of behaviors and so on. You're basically asking somebody indigent to do something that is more complex than most anything they have to do in their lives. And I'm speaking from experience here. And it is intimidating and all of that stuff. So yes, there are some solutions here. If that program exists, it needs to be better notification, and especially it needs to be much, much streamlined because when you're really hurting and not just physically hurting, when you don't know where your next rent check or even meal's coming from, then the idea of finding your last two tax stubs. By the way, when you're in that kind of situation, you don't have the last two tax returns. You don't have tax returns for the last 6, 7, 8, 10 years. If you're in that kind of situation, you show us their tax returns. I haven't filed taxes in years. Why? Well, because it's either pay the government in taxes or I can eat. Those are my two choices, and guess which one I went with.
Yeah.
So it's a refusal to accept the situation as it is. But with all of that said, I do think that the people who would benefit from this kind of charity have an obligation to that charity, and even if that obligation is nothing more than genuine gratitude.
I think that in some ways this highlights some key questions that need to be answered in our healthcare system. And in other ways, it highlights the fact that there are some key questions that can never be answered in our healthcare system. It's different when you're talking about people's healthcare. It's different than just talking about some consumer product. Nobody's particularly concerned that the poor can't buy the latest iPhone 12, or at least no sane person is concerned about that, while they may think that the average person should have some sort of a cellular communication device. But it's with consumer goods, we're not expecting the federal government to come in and subsidize that directly. We're not expecting charities to get involved in that. But in this case, it's kind of like the difference between giving money to a university and giving money directly to students. Part of the reason why a college education costs as much as it does is because many of the students are effectively able to spend free money. Now, it may not be free in the long haul. Some of it is. Some of it's scholarship dollars or grants, but some of it is loan money at relatively low interest stretched out over long periods of time. So in effect, they are spending future money by essentially writing an IOU right now. That allows universities not only to provide a solid education, but to raise the pay for their professors, to create amenities, which is an unusual word when you think in the terms of an educational institution, but swimming pools and gymnasiums and food courts and better dormitories. And I essentially lived in a cinder block box with metal bunk beds when I went to school, and I'm sure my grandfather looked at that room and said, "You kids with your luxuries." So
walls, ceilings.
That's right. So should we subsidize the schools? Should we subsidize the students? During the Trump administration, one of the efforts that was made to address the healthcare issues was a measure to demand more transparency about pricing. Apparently, a lot of hospitals have not complied with the Trump administration rules about transparency when it comes to pricing and billing practices. This particular chain that we're talking about that I got from this Wall Street Journal story is actually following those transparency guidelines. I don't know if there's a bad guy in this story, but there are a lot of well-intentioned people or desperate people who need something, who are all doing what they think is best at the time in order to either get what they need or provide the service that they're supposed to provide, and then just kind of let the chips fall where they may. But I think if you're going to write off $37.7 million in bad debt, I don't think you should also take a check from a charity for a huge amount of money to cover the bad debt. Either it's written off or it's not written off. And a lot of this, I think, can be done without any real money changing hands. I mean, it's almost a negotiation between the charity and the hospital to come in and say, look, you've got these 82,000 patients. They owe $278 million. Here's what my charity is going to give you. Here's a red pen. I want you to take this pen and draw a line through the indebtedness on the spreadsheet of each of those customers, and we'll call it square. There is no really good answer. I will say that despite all the mess of the American medical system, it is a miracle that even the poorest of the poor can walk into an emergency room and get treatment that's cost $100,000, and they'll deal with how to get paid for it later, but you're not turned out into the streets. That's not singing the praises and claiming some sort of utopia, but it's better than the alternative. For Bill Whittle and Stephen Green, I'm Scott Ott. Thanks to the members at BillWhittle.com for making Right Angle possible.